Good afternoon. This is Media Center, Ukraine, Odesa. Today, we are starting with the briefing dedicated to violation of human rights in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. Our speaker is Vira Yastrebova, attorney, director of the NGO Shidna Pravosazahisna Grupa, Eastern Human Rights Group. Vira, the floor is yours. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. Today I'm going to provide you updates about the violation of human rights in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. During this briefing, I would like to share with you information about new measures taken by the occupier. Our analytics are reporting about hidden mobilization in the occupied territories of Zaporizhzhia and Kherson regions. Occupiers' administrations are introducing military commissariats there or recruitment centers. It is known that more than 4,000 men were registered there. The registration takes place every day, and according to our information, registered men will be further on forced to sign contract with the Ministry of Defense of Russia to fight against Ukraine. But they will say that allegedly the men from the occupied territories will voluntarily sign this contract. On the temporarily occupied territories of Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts, the mobilization is ongoing pursuant to the laws of the Russian Federation. And on the border of the occupied territories between Ukraine and the Russian Federation, they have been imposing additional control to prevent men from leaving those territories. So they have introduced, so to say, Iron Curtain to prevent men from leaving occupied territories of Ukraine to the Russian Federation. Why do they need this? They want to use local population in its actions aimed at destroying Ukraine and Ukrainians on the temporarily occupied territories. It has been also reported about mobilization in prisons on the temporarily occupied territories. In July 2023, 642 persons were released from prisons to be involved in the war against Ukraine. So they are just scaling up that method that they use on the territory of Russia, using these illegal military formations to the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. We keep telling about the forced deportation of children from the temporarily occupied territories. Last time I told that the process is still there, but the tactics is now different. But they also used children on the temporarily occupied territories as donors of blood. Children are forced. Parents are not asked. This is a centralized process. In the healthcare institutions of the temporarily occupied territories, there is a significant demand for blood, for the injured military of the Russian Federation, who are now kept in those hospitals, and they are priority for treatment on the temporarily occupied territories. Those children who have not been taken from their families are used differently now. And this is a gross violation of the international law. And this also endangers the life and health of the children who are forced to donate blood. And we should tell about this. Occupation authorities continue putting pressure on locals, and we should remember about this. The courts on the temporarily occupied territories, they prolong sentences and illegally sentence citizens of Ukraine, and I would like to share several cases. The so-called Supreme Court of the so-called Luhansk People's Republic sentenced the local man there who wanted to protect himself and his home from the occupiers. So there was a clash between him and the occupier soldiers there, and as a result, the man killed an occupier and injured another one. And the court decision is life sentence to this person. A person from Lutugina, which is also occupied territory, was sentenced to 14 years of imprisonment for supporting Ukraine. And this person was a Russian citizen. Why are they imposing such severe sentences? Because those courts acting under the flag of the occupier add the sentence for the betrayal of the Russian Federation. The sentences are very strict, and these are legal courts, and Ukrainians don't have their rights protected. This is the repression machine. And now it is understood why it is like that. These people are put to prison first, and then later there will be a transfer program for these people from a prison to the front line. And this mechanism has already been introduced. It is no secret that the Russian Federation grossly violates the Geneva Convention. And I can share examples. They started sentencing our Ukrainian military. For example, Alexei Breduletsky, grenade thrower, who served under a contract in military unit 3027 of the National Guard of Ukraine with the military rank of soldier, was sentenced to 14 years of imprisonment in a strict regime colony by the quasi-court of the occupier. I have a clarifying question. Why wasn't he treated as a prisoner of war if he's a Ukrainian serviceman? How could they sentence him as a criminal? This is an open question, because now you're talking about the Geneva Convention, And I'm now telling you about the examples of violation of the Geneva Convention. The judges who are there, the law enforcement bodies who are there, who are involved in those repressions on the occupied territory, just neglect the international law. I will have some more examples shared today about the violation of the international law. For example, another serviceman of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Alexander Pinkovsky, who served in the 54th Separate Mechanized Motorized Infantry Brigade. This is military unit 0693, was also sentenced to 14 years of imprisonment. Rifleman of the 24th Separate Mechanized Brigade from the Armed Forces of Ukraine was also sentenced to 15 years of imprisonment, and he also had the military rank of soldier. He was also sentenced to stay in a strict regime colony. This information was collected through the legal community, who can provide information to human rights organizations. What does it tell about? It means that the Russian Federation is not ready to stop, to follow, it is not ready to follow the international law, and also it is not ready to implement the Declaration on Human Rights. This means that all people staying on the temporarily occupied territories are potential victims of future crimes. That's why we need to understand too that we need to support the armed forces of Ukraine. We need to support any initiatives aimed at speeding up the deoccupation of these territories. And I would also like to say that the discussion about collaborators and gaining Russian passports on the occupied territories that is there in our society and we inform about the situation on the occupied territories. It is impossible to fight the occupiers on those territories. That's why there will be pre-court investigations for all facts of collaboration with the enemy. And we need to understand that it is very difficult for our Ukrainians there, and they are the victims of the so-called Russian world that brought the war to our territory. We've already covered several times the topics of alienation of property in temporarily occupied territories. Last time, I told you about the measures taken by occupiers to alienate vehicles from the local population there. They continue their attempts to, so to say, nationalize, in quotation marks, the property there. And we can now say that occupation administrations have completed the registration of industrial and residential facilities through quasi-commissions. They just leave the letters, the summons to the occupation administration to inform about the fact whether people still reside there. Otherwise, this property will be nationalized or alienated. We have received information thus that in the temporarily occupied territory of the Kherson region, they plan to sell 25 industrial objects. This means that the occupier nationalizes the houses of people who have left. They also alienate vehicles under the pretext of it being used during the curfew, or under pretext of violating other rules of the occupation administrations. This is a pretext to take this property from locals, and the business is no exception, unfortunately. The occupier continues its de-Ukrainization and its fines against the textbooks published in Ukraine. The FSB on the occupied territory of the Donetsk Oblast have seized more than 1,500 Ukrainian books in Mariupol. So there is the list of the federal list of extremism materials, and that 1,500 copies of the banned literature was destroyed, and it is banned because it is in Ukrainian language, and that was also the pretext for detaining 15 persons. Even if you store Ukrainian books, Ukrainian literature, then occupation authorities believe that these people are extremists. And we understand that they will not stop there. As for the terror imposed on the local population, I would like to share information about the 19-year-old Ukrainian woman from Mironivka who will be tried for tearing the occupier's flag, the flag of the Russian Federation. Residents of the village of Mironivka contacted an administration there, reporting that girl. Her personality was identified. She took the flag from an administrative building and tore it. A criminal case has been opened against the suspect under Article 329 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation, molestation of the state flag of the Russian Federation. So we can see that there are attempts to fight against the Russian Federation, but the value is very high. And despite that, Ukrainians are ready to demonstrate their attitude to the occupier. But unfortunately, the price is very high. We hope that the occupation and reintegration of the temporarily territories of Ukraine will be over as soon as possible, and that girl will be respected by the whole Ukrainian people instead of tortures in the prison now. As for detained citizens on the temporarily occupied territories, in July 2023, 218 citizens of Ukraine were detained there. These figures were reported by the sources in the occupied territories. So this is the only information we know, but we understand that unfortunately the number is higher. Occupiers try to destroy Ukrainian identity, Ukrainian literature, Ukrainian spirit, which is shown, for example, by this courageous 19-year-old girl and other people who go against occupation authorities and now tortured by the enemy. This means that the Russian Federation, in the form it exists now, is empire of evil, blood, and hatred. And we hope that in the nearest future, Ukrainian territories will be liberated, and people will be liberated, and they will have the legal field, legal framework back to them to punish those who torture them now. I would like to thank the Media Center Ukraine, Odesa, for the possibility to inform journalists and our audience watching us now about the current situation in the temporarily occupied territories. And if you allow, we will continue providing periodic reports about the situation there. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to heroes. Thank you very much for your report. This is a very important topic, both for those who are tortured and whose rights are violated on the temporarily occupied territories, and also for journalists and for people who really need to understand the difficult conditions for people under occupation. And perhaps they will not be responded so disputably to the Russian passports issued there. Thank you very much for your report, and of course, you will be invited in the future to inform about the situation there. Unfortunately, such sad reports. That was the briefing of Vira Yastrebova about the violation of human rights on the occupied territories. Our next briefing will be at noon. Follow our announcements and stay tuned.